Evening, family. I hope you had a wonderful afternoon, restful, spiritually connected. I hope you've been refreshed today. I've made the decision to not carry on the morning sermon tonight. I will do a part 2 about God's will next Sunday morning. I really think it's crucial that we spend some time speaking about what His will is and to be reminded of it in the areas that I know that we know. So tonight we'll carry on with our study with Joseph. If you wouldn't mind opening your Bibles, if you haven't already, to the book of Genesis, chapter 40. And while you're turning to Genesis chapter 40, I'd like to set this evening's lesson up with a little illustration, a story. In 1955 began the Vietnam conflict. The United States was involved mostly at the beginning with talks. But as the years went on, things amped up, of course. And by the time we get to 1965, the United States starts sending military force to Vietnam. In 1965, there was a pilot who was one of the first to be shot down and taken captive into a Vietnamese POW camp. And he tells of a horrendous time in his life where he was tortured almost daily. He was chained many times in a swampy area with his hands chained above his head while the mosquitoes by the thousands attacked him. He spoke of times where they broke bones, where they would not allow them to be reset to heal. They just healed on their own, and he carried those wounds for the rest of his life. And he said out of all of that, what was the worst was when he was separated from his American comrades. Isolation. When they put him in isolation, it was just the worst. Well, thankfully, he survived, and he was sent home. Once he got home, people were very curious about knowing what happened. And of course, he was very reluctant to speak of it. The pain was so difficult, the pain of memory. But as time went on, he found and felt that it was necessary for him to share his story, and he did. And along the way then, people asked him, well, how did you survive? What gave you the strength to get things through so that you could get to the place where you are now? And he said, purpose and hope. He said, every day I woke up with purpose. Every day I woke up with hope. He said, I knew that my purpose was, I was a man who was married. I had a wife. My purpose was to be a husband. I had children. My purpose was to be a dad. I had friends. My purpose was to be a friend. I had a job before the military. My purpose was to go back home and have that job and to raise those kids and to be with my wife. I had a purpose while I was in prison to wake up every day trying to seek and find things that I could do that were positive, to move my day forward. Even as negative as people were trying to be to me, I wanted to be purposeful in moving my day forward because I knew someday I had the hope of going home. I had the hope of being a dad, of being a husband, of being a friend, and having purpose in my life. And he said, I'll be honest with you, I watched men, brave men, strong men, eventually lose that hope and lose that purpose. And they lost their lives along the way because they stopped the fight and they just relinquished. And it's understandable, as much as we had gone through, for good, strong men to finally release and give up. But he said, finally, it was my faith in God that pulled it all together. Because of my purpose, my value, and my hope in Him kept my life going when so much life around me was ending. Now, I give that illustration as at least some sort of powerful reminder to remind you of where Joseph is. You see, he's in prison. He's in a dungeon. His freedom's been taken away from him. And by the time we pick things up where we left things off, he will have been imprisoned or a slave for 13 years. And I believe that Joseph is a man who held on to very much these same principles. That he woke up every morning with purpose. That he woke up every morning with hope. That he woke up every morning with faith. You know, faith is connected to hope, by the way. And so as he did, he realized that he had purpose in his day. He had value with his life no matter where it was. Oh, he was raised in the dysfunctional family. And yes, his brothers hated him. And yes, he was tossed into a pit. And yes, he was sold into slavery. Yes, he was sold to Potiphar. Yes, Potiphar's wife was evil and spoke lies about him. Yes, he is falsely imprisoned. And yes, that is a horrible place to be, but he still found every morning he woke up that he has purpose in serving the king no matter where he is. And his attitude showed it, his actions showed it, his hope gave him strength, and it led him to a place where God wanted him to be to go to the next stage in his life. And I want us today, as we walk through this journey, to slip on his sandals. And to know that although we may not be imprisoned as he was, God has a purpose in your life. He has a plan in your life. He has hope for your life. And you and I have people watching. We have our spouses and our children. We have our friends and our neighbors. We have the people that we work with shoulder to shoulder in our community. And they need to see people like you and I with purpose and hope, with a willingness to serve no matter what the circumstances are, to honor and glorify him and to find the value of giving and caring and serving and sharing no matter what the circumstances, and you watch what happens to the world around you. That's what we find for Joseph. And so we pick it up in chapter 40. And as we looked at chapter 40, I want to remind you that he had just then told the cupbearer and the baker the interpretation of their dreams. And he says to the cupbearer who will survive, hey, listen, you're going to be set back when Pharaoh has his birthday, you're going to be called to regain your position that you had before. You're going to be set free and restored. Now, it didn't work out so well for the baker. But then he says this in verse 14 to the cupbearer. He says, only keep me in mind when it goes well with you. And please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house, which is actually prison, the dungeon. Now, what I'm grateful for, though, in this moment, is that Joseph didn't put his hope and his trust in a man. Now, he could have, and I'm sure he had some, like, man, this could be it for me. I could finally be set free. But he knew that he placed his hope and his purpose and his trust and his love in God. So whatever was going to unfold, I mean, it's not like he hasn't been let down by other people in his past already. So whatever the Lord has in store, whatever unfolds, I'm going to continue doing what I've been called to do. I'm going to make my life purposeful in serving whatever I can do where I'm at right now. But cupbearer, it'd sure be nice if you let Pharaoh know who I am and where I'm at. Verse 23. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Are you kidding me? After what he did? But he forgot him. 2 years pass by from the time he says that to the cupbearer in prison to the time he finally gets a chance to get out. 2 more years. And that's where we pick up our story. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, Ted, he has the right attitude and he finds the purpose and he finds the hope because, well, let's face it, he had this little inside track with God and, he gets these chances to interpret dreams. And so there's this really extra special connection with God. So, of course, he had hope and found purpose. I want to remind everybody in this auditorium that we know far more about our God than Joseph ever did. That we have the fullness of what God deems as revealing of himself in all of his wonders and all of his might and all of his plan and all of his power and all of the things time and time again, unleashing the fullness of who he is because he loves us and he gives us Jesus and we know that he's raised from the dead and we're filled with the Holy Spirit and we have the fullness of his word, all of it right here. We know so much more about God and who he is than Joseph ever did. So in other words, we should have more hope and more purpose and more attitude of, man, whatever the world is going to unfold in front of me today, I know I'm waking up with the idea of serving him. Whatever it is, I know I'm going to keep my attitude and look for opportunities. Wherever it is, jail or work or school, I am going to seek it, man, because I know I've got hope. I know I've got purpose. I know he has a plan. And as I go every day, he keeps unfolding that plan in front of me and with me. And I just have no idea what today's going to hold, except that I'm going to keep serving my king. And in serving my king, I'm going to be serving other people because that's what my king wants me to do. And in serving other people, then he's going to open up doors when it's his time and his calling to lead me to whatever place he wants me to go. But as for me right now, I'm just going to keep on serving because I have a purpose and I have value and I have hope. And so he kept that attitude for 2 long years. And God's timing is everything. So let's pick it up now in chapter 41, verse 1. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile. Now, I don't know how much you guys dream. I mean, are you people, when you go to sleep, are you folks that tend to have dreams? Well, I would imagine that for Pharaoh, the beginning of this dream is a pretty good one. The Nile is a really key piece in their land. And they view the Nile as a god. And so now he starts this dream, and there's the Nile. Oh, the mighty Nile. And then it goes on, the dream keeps on going. Verse 2, and lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. Oh, Pharaoh must be going, this is a lovely dream. Because cattle, they held so much meaning to the Egyptians. And, oh, this is so good. And then, verse 3, then behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. I mean, he was shaken out of this dream. This is a nightmare now. Have any of you had nightmares? Do you remember them? It's funny. I tend to remember the nightmares more than the good mares. When I was 8 years old, I loved Speed Racer, man. I had Speed Racer sheets. I had Speed Racer pillowcase. I had a Speed Racer covering on my bed, and I was tucked in at 8 years old in my little Speed Racer bed, just ready to snuggle on in because I tended at the time, at least, to sleep pretty well. somewhere in the midst of it, I can vividly remember, if I'm correct, this I think was my very first nightmare I ever had. As I was sleeping, I really felt like I was in this really, really tall building, standing on this floor, on the top floor of this really tall building. And all of a sudden, the floor gave way, and I started a free fall. And every floor that I hit, I kept going through and breaking through the floor, one after the next. And I'm panicking inside, and I'm sure my heart rate just burst up, and I'm just falling and falling until I could recognize as I'm going down that the very last floor that I saw, I knew was solid. And as soon as I hit that, I was toast. So just before I hit that last floor, I was awakened on the floor in my bedroom. Somewhere along the line, I was falling out of my bed, and somehow the nightmare became in some ways a reality for me. And man, that shook me up. And so I say that to try to get us to then familiarize ourselves with what Pharaoh must have been going through. He's panicking, these two key pieces of who he is and what the land is all about and the wealth that they have from those things. Man, he's like, but he stirs and he finally settles down enough to go back to sleep. Verse 5. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Now another good dream. Now remember that Egypt is a huge supplier of grain for the world. I mean, this is like a major food supply for all living mankind. And so because of that, their wealth is tremendous because of the crops. So this is another good dream. Verse 6. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream, another nightmare. Now it came about in the morning that his spirit was troubled. So he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them for the Pharaoh. So what's he going to do? Nightmares, no answers. He's really concerned. The people that he'd relied on in the past were unable to come up with the answers, and now he's stuck. And it's now at this time we see the cupbearer come back into the story. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. What? Pharaoh was furious with his servants, and he put me in confidence in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. And when we had a dream on the same night, he and I, each of us, dreamed according to the interpretations of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguards, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream. And it came about that just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me in my office, but he hanged him. Then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph. If you get nothing else from this message, please get this. Joseph, because of what he was doing, because of his purpose and his hope and his faith and his willingness to serve even in very difficult situations on a day-to-day basis, was ready when God said, now is the time that I'm going to change the direction of your life. but he was willing to serve the Lord with his life no matter what direction he was in at the time. Please understand that we don't have to wait for a really special event to then show ourselves to be ready to serve. To be ready to serve, we need to be prepared by serving where we're at right now. Because it gets us ready with the right discipline and the right attitude and I just lost the word. It just left my mind. I should be drinking coffee tonight and not Gatorade. The stamina, the endurance, the toughness, all the things that he had to face and endure, but he woke up every day to serve whatever he could do as best as he could with what God has given him, and then he gives it to others. So that when the next big thing comes up, he's ready for it and he's there and he's available for it. Because he didn't hide in the corner, because he doesn't have the bad attitude, because he doesn't have those things. He's available all the time for God. This is really key. Because now when Pharaoh says this, now they rush Joseph out to do what he's been called to do. This reminds me of another Old Testament historical event in the life of Esther. Let's turn there real quick. Esther. See, what I love in many ways about Sunday evenings is we don't have to be in a rush. You know, at 8:30, we need to be ready for class at 10. At 11 o'clock, we need to be ready for lunch at noon. Tonight, some of you are going out, but I want to be ready for dinner. That's all right. Pizza dude can deliver. Esther. King Xerxes, king of Persia. Here's a guy who has an attitude and ego bigger than this building. And we find at the very beginning of the story that he invites, he's going to throw this party, this huge 180-day party. He's going to invite all the who's who so he can show off all that he has. And so they all show up and they're going to have this big old party, and these men, they're just going at it. And then he's going to throw a 7-day party for the rest of the people. And they can drink all they want to, or they don't have to drink. They can just, eat what they want to. They don't have to eat, whatever it is. I just want people to just realize just how amazing I am as this leader, as this king. Just look at all these things. And then King Xerxes, he takes it up to the next level. He goes, well, we're just going to have a one-person beauty pageant. I'm going to call my wife out here because she is obviously the most attractive in the land, and I want to prance her around you guys to show you just how awesome I have it. Hey, queen, yeah, put your crown on. I want you to come on up here, and I want you to prance in front of all these people, show how pretty you are. You know what she said? I don't think so. Good for her. Good for her. Well, the king's not happy. So he gets this advice. Thankfully, they didn't execute her, but they definitely did banish her. She wasn't allowed to come back into the presence. They removed all of her title, all of her power, all of her stuff. She was no longer queen. And then from that, we find that the king puts out this edict out to the land to all the men in their households. Man, you rule your houses. You show the women where they are in their home. Not good. That's not from me. That's from the king, okay? We have a co-equal relationship right here. She just said amen. But now the king, he wants a queen. Puts the word out. And they gather all these beautiful women. And the year was a 1-year prep time. Could you imagine that, ladies? 1 year of spa treatment every day? Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Well, that's what they did to really get these women ready to be shown in front of the king. And so 1 year goes by, and now it's Esther's turn. and she impresses the king. She becomes queen. Who is she, though? She's just a Jewish captive. That's all she is. She's really a nobody. Now, she hides her Jewish nationality. Mordecai tells her to make sure she doesn't tell anybody. Mordecai also has helped out the king. He's thwarted a plot, and it's written down, but that's forgotten about too. And there's this guy by the name of Haman, and he's a pretty egotistical dude. And now we got this Queen Esther, and she knows she can't come before the king unless the king calls her. She's very much aware of that, but now she's in a position because she has the right purpose and the right attitude and the right hope and the right focus and willing to do the right thing even in the wrong, most difficult situation. She still does it. But see, now there's a problem. Mordecai doesn't bow down to Haman. Haman gets really upset, and he comes up with a plan. He wants to rid the world of all Jews. He goes and he gets it confirmed by the king, King Xerxes. These people are nasty. Let's wipe them all out. Yeah, let's do that. And he signs the edict. He signs the death notice for all the Jewish people. So Mordecai then does something about it. Chapter 4, the book of Esther. Verse 1. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on a sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in each and every province where the command and decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went. He went to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor, to plead with him for her people. Then Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. She says this: all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman to come to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. And they related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to say this to her. Watch this, church. Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. Don't think for a moment, if you shirk your responsibility and then shrink back and not do this, don't think that you're not going to be a part of this mess. You can come up with all the excuses that you want to try to keep you away from it, but the reality is you do the King of Kings work, no matter where you are, and you take chances and courage. And I know it won't be easy, and I know you're going to have to risk your life in this thing, but I'm telling you right now, if you shrink back and don't do it, it's going to cost life anyway. So then these words: for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. You want to know why? You see, God had a plan. And through the nation of Israel, Judah, is going to come this Messiah. And so all the Jewish folks couldn't be wiped out, because if they did, then we won't get to Jesus. If we don't have Jesus, now we've got nothing. God has a plan to save his people so that we can have a Savior. And so Mordecai makes this very well known. Well, if you don't, God's going to come up with another way. But boy, he's calling on you, because watch what he's done. Watch. From another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty? What's the phrase? I can't hear you. There's your lesson. Every day is for such a time like this for us. And sometimes our days will lead to some days we're going to have some pretty big courage. Because church, lives are on a line. I'm glad for Uncle Bill, who told your mom about Jesus. I'm glad for the struggles and the issues that she had to face that then led her to being more dedicated to the Lord, which then led my wife kicking and screaming at first going to church. But then while there, meeting somebody who was a wonderful woman. And then through trials and tribulations in your own life, you decided, no, I'm going to face God with faith and love him. And so through those difficult times, she chose to find the purpose and the hope to be a servant of the King. And because she did that with a big old dummy like me, I saw it. And I stand before you here today because people in my life didn't miss such a time as this. And there isn't a soul in this auditorium that doesn't have something to do with God's plan, with purpose, to then help people to be set free. Because you can help save a family unit for generations by teaching them about Jesus Christ now, by serving with the right attitude now, by just waking up in your everyday life, at work, at home, in the supermarket, wherever, and you're just going to go about with the attitude of, man, I know my God has a plan. It's just a regular everyday day, but I'm not going to miss the moment. I'm still going to do with the right attitude what he calls me to do. And whatever door he opens up, I'm going to be there to welcome him because I'm doing my King's work. And then when asked to step through into that throne room and see those big deals and the big things and the challenging things, I'm going to be like Joseph and I'm going to be like Esther and I'm going to figure out how I can put together with God's help a plan to set the right atmosphere to say the things that need to be said. And you know that's what Esther does? Boy, she was creative. You know what the king likes? Parties, banquets. So she set them up. You know who Haman is with a big attitude? He thought it was for him. And then through that amazing, tactful, creative timing, she unleashes the truth. And I'm convinced our God, when we walk in his will do the same thing for us at such a time as this. But church, we've got to be at that place when he opens that door. Joseph was. And he interprets the dream. And then the Pharaoh puts him in charge of saving the lives of just about everybody on this earth by getting ready for the drought, for the famine. And they survived because Joseph's such a time as this started well before he was ever thrown into the pit. You see, you don't have to be thrown into the pit to have your such a time as this. Matter of fact, I'd be ready for the pits by doing the King's work now. Oh, the purpose that we have and the plans our God has for each of us individually and collectively. I haven't really dreamt this. I'm hoping to. I really do dream. I'm hoping to dream about what this community would look like if none of us here missed a time such as this. You know, providentially, God has figured out that we are all here at this time as members of this congregation during this generation with all the struggles and trials in the world and all the struggles and the trials that we have in our own individual lives to fulfill his plan of growing his kingdom. And he doesn't leave us ill-equipped. He's just waiting for us to not miss the time. And so maybe between this morning's sermon and tonight, you'd like to confess and repent and be restored and renewed and refocused. Man, I'm hopeful. And if you're somebody that wants to give yourself to Jesus, to be baptized into him, oh, we'll celebrate with you as we stand and sing the song of invitation.